Some people are unpleasant to be around and even hurtful, and it's smart to avoid being around them. But what if you can't? They're your in-law, your coworker, your boss, or even more challenging, your spouse. Today we'll get some guidance on how to deal with those difficult people you just can't avoid. We'll try to identify who they are and techniques to best negotiate those situations. With me today is Dr. Beth Jennings. She's a clinical psychologist who's been in private practice for 15 years, and she's been a past or present consultant to Dane County courts, social service agencies, and Fortune 500 companies. Beth, thanks for being with us. Can you give us examples? Let's start with 2 or 3 of the most common, difficult prototypes of people to be around.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, Dick.
You're welcome.
Some of the common difficult types of people that we run into, I would say, are in part the ones that we can't get away from. Like you were saying, there are some people that we probably shouldn't be around, and we can avoid them. But mainly our family and our coworkers, and sometimes our neighbors, are people that we will run up against in terms of feeling frustrated, annoyed, or even quite upset by. I think some of the most difficult types of people are the ones that don't follow the rules that we expect them to in terms of speaking. For instance, one of my favorites is the overtalker. And I think
that's my favorite. The motor mouth.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
That person that just doesn't take a breath.
Yeah.
And I think we all can identify with that, either the neighbor who just corners you or a coworker and you cannot get away.
Mm-hmm.
They just talk and talk and talk and talk.
What's up with that? Why do people do that?
I think a lot of people do that because they don't quite understand either the rules of communication, meaning that there should be some back and forth, some reciprocity. Other times people are very nervous, and so they will fill the air or fill the space with information. The 2 different flavors of over-talkers I think that are pretty common are the sort of garden variety, and those are the people that will often tell stories that have so much extraneous detail.
I know that one. I've met that one too many times.
And then there are the folks that I think are pretty insecure. People that are nervous or self-conscious, and those are the ones that sometimes will act opposite of how they're feeling, so that they will sort of boast or kind of drone on about their accomplishments.
In my sense, is they're rarer than the first type you're talking about, that just like to hear themselves talk.
Yes. Yeah.
And can they be stopped by just saying, you just talk an awful lot. It'd be nicer if you listen more and talk less. Will that change them?
I think it certainly could have an impact. Sometimes an impact might not be the best or the result that you want in terms of your relationship with them. Sometimes,
why not? I mean, if you say to them, Martha, you constantly are talking and it hurts my feelings that you never want to hear what I have to say. Why wouldn't that help the relationship?
I think if you said that message but maybe cushioned it in a more...
you don't want to say you're a motor mouth, Martha.
No, you don't. See, what happens, Dick, is that when you confront somebody, and confronting and saying the truth is very important.
Yeah.
It is what you need in many ways to get it changed. But when you confront somebody with a problem that they have, oftentimes the minute that confrontation comes out, their ears close, right? Because it feels bad. So, for instance, let's say you're Martha, and I'm, I don't know, pick a relationship. What kind of relationship?
Okay, you're Bob.
Okay, I'm Bob, you're Martha. But are we talking a neighbor, a coworker, a friend?
Let's say a coworker.
A coworker. Well, you got to keep working with this person. So I think you need to be mindful of how your comment may sound. And so cushioning it or softening it might be the best approach, as opposed to kind of a laser focused, you talk too much, I need you to, stop, or what have you. I would recommend saying something like, Martha, I really appreciate the story, but I have got to get going on this work, and I know that oftentimes when we get together, you have so much to say that I can't really either get my work done, or I feel like, well, if it's a coworker, your feelings aren't going to get hurt so much. Worse, as a friend, but you can tell them, I really. You're talking too much, but you can say it in a way that's just a little bit more easy to hear. And so I will often tell people, wait till they take a breath, if they do, and then give a direct reason why, unfortunately, as much as you love to stay or as much as you appreciate what they have to say, you need to get going because you've spent a lot more time than you had thought.
Let me move on here. We're going to come back to how you do it.
Yeah.
But kind of the list, the hits of the top number of troubled people to be around, difficult people. One is, so we got the person who talks too much. Very, very common.
Yes.
Some others.
Oh, this is a big office one, the pessimist. Also known as the Debbie Downer, the negative Nelly. We've all seen the Saturday Night Live skit. This is the person who, no matter what you say, no matter what suggestion is put out there at work, no matter what the topic is, they will almost invariably have some negative take on it. And their stock phrase may be, "This is so frustrating and annoying," or they just kind of live in this place of looking at the dark side, and they.
So that's negative Nelly, and then another one we've got.
What I call the help rejecter, or a chronic complainer.
Yes.
Okay.
I know that one.
And this is somebody who, oftentimes we'll see this in more in friendships or family relationships necessarily than at work, but somebody who's very, very vocal about their problems, sort of wants to talk about their issues or their problem a lot, is frequently bringing it up, frequently asking for suggestions. But it's almost as if they're doing it just to say it out loud. They're not really taking in or hearing or doing anything with the suggestions that they're asking for. So that's why I call them the help rejectors. So that person will sort of keep asking for more solutions, and then you may offer some. They will not do anything about it, complain or say yes, but that's not going to work because, and then the cycle starts over, and they bring back up again, and you're just drained.
Now, what is it that's so difficult about working with these kind of people?
What's difficult is, number one, you haven't chosen to be around them. And number two, so these are people that you have to interact with that you didn't necessarily select to be in your world. And because you want to keep your job, depending on where they fall in the hierarchy at work, especially if it's somebody who's a superior to you, well, then that's a very different ball of wax because you've they have some power over you. But these are people who you are forced to be around, and you are trying to maintain a certain performance or nice pleasantness so that your job is not in jeopardy, and yet they're driving a wall.
Yeah, that's tough. Okay, so why don't we keep naming them before we get back to the nuts and bolts of how you deal with them. Let's get them out there.
All righty.
So we know what we're attacking.
Let's throw them out. Okay, so we have the intimidator.
Oh.
Yeah. The bully. Okay.
The verbal bully.
The verbal bully. You betcha.
Well, how do they do that?
How do they intimidate?
Yeah. What does a verbal bully sound like?
Well, a verbal bully can sound anything from somebody who always needs to be right, always needs to be the one in the know, the one who's constantly one-upping, and also somebody who may give a lot of unsolicited advice. Somebody who'll say, you really need to do X. Or, but then there's also the more subtle form. We see this more with women. Women are typically taught to not be as direct in confrontation. So women may sometimes do the backhanded compliment. This is a total awful sexist stereotype, so perhaps I won't use this.
Go for it.
All right. I don't mean to sound like all women talk about are shoes and clothes, but it's just a real gimme example. So if kind of the intimidator bully a friend or acquaintance might say, "Oh, I love that dress. You know, I had one like that. I wore it all last season." You know, sort of
Yes.
implying, you know,
Yes.
leaving hanging.
Yes.
And if you do enough of those digs, that can really put the other person on edge or questioning themselves. So that's a pretty tough person. I think it's probably more difficult when they are subtle than the direct, because the direct you can call.
Is that close to the passive-aggressive person?
I'm glad that you brought that up, because it actually isn't. The whole idea of a passive-aggressive, people I think often think of passive-aggressive as somebody who's giving these snarky, backhanded, and you know, collectively that's sort of how we describe that, and it's not a big deal. But what passive-aggressive really means is that somebody who's expressing their displeasure, their anger, their conflict, you know, whatever aggression you want to call that, they express that negativity in a passive way. And by passive, you could say passively by saying this backhanded compliment insult, but really what I mean by passively is that they don't do things. So by being passive, by not following through, by forgetting, by ways that by them not doing things, by being passive in their actions, they are expressing the anger, negatives that they do not like to express directly.
Well, how many times, this is sexist or whatever, maybe not, but as you said, women tend to be more passive-aggressive perhaps than men. I don't know if you're agreeing with that.
I am actually disagreeing.
No kidding.
Yeah, I am disagreeing.
Okay, well, let's go to the man on this. I can picture many instances in my past where I'll say, well, why don't you do that? Fine, I'll do that. Fine. That seems so feminine or female. Fine. I don't see men doing that. Fine, I'll do it. And letting you know it's not fine. Tell me how men are passive-aggressive.
Believe it or not, there are, well, depends on how much into the clinical psych part you want to go.
Your call.
Okay, well, essentially, the whole idea of people who have a hard time expressing anger. Yes, I agree with you that, again, culturally, it's more acceptable for men to express anger than women.
Right.
I mean, we know this, right?
Not
women
a good thing, but okay.
Right. Women are taught to be nice, to connect with people, make everyone feel good. Yeah. So the whole idea of passive aggressive stems from this idea that whether it's inborn or you learned it, there's this sort of push-pull inside between wanting to be connected, right? So you want people to like you, you want to be positive, you don't want to upset people, and at the same time are very afraid of being hurt. And so that leads to this idea that people who are passive-aggressive really will say yes because that's part of them that wants to stay connected, right? But then there's this other, it's not as simple as I just don't want to express anger. It's a lot of times people aren't even aware. And then there's this other part of people who the person wants to stay connected and say yes, but then that other part of them wants to protect themselves and stay disconnected, right?
Okay.
So they're not vulnerable.
So I'm interested in the behavior, how this manifests, what you see when you're dealing with a passive-aggressive person.
Well, you see people rarely making decisions. This is real hard for people that are working with somebody in a group setting or task setting. People who have this sort of style tend to not want to put themselves out there, right? Because they could look dumb or get rejected if they have a bad idea. So passive-aggressive behavior we'll see is people not making decisions, not expressing what they want, not acknowledging, for instance, you say to your partner, hey, where do you want to go for dinner? And they go, I don't know. I don't care. And so then you pick. And so then you pick, and then they pout the whole time at the restaurant, right?
Okay,
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
I get it. Okay. So, are there any more to bring up before we get to work? Yeah, what do you got? What's
we got
left?
one more. And this sort of stems from the help rejector. On a more, this is a little bit more rare, but on a higher scale or more intense scale, you have what I call the tornado or the crisis whirlwind. And again, I said it's rare, but when it happens, it's incredibly distressing. And this is when you are in relationship or come into contact with somebody who's in a very, very bad space in terms of they're having crises or whatever it is, and they sort of kind of gravitate to you and kind of want you to help them. Which a lot of us want to help people, so we sure. And then, but there's unfortunately some what I'll call manipulative behavior, and the tornado person will essentially be sort of making you feel like, you are awesome. I really thank you. I appreciate this. You're the only one that can help me. But yet, almost simultaneously, getting mad and accusing you of not caring, or. And this can be a neighbor, a coworker, a friend, a partner, and it can turn into a pretty ugly situation with some drama.
Yeah, so if you're with this person, working with this person, or living with this person, you're going to be in a lot of stress a lot of the time.
A lot of stress.
Okay. Give us an overview of why it's so difficult dealing with these difficult people.
Well, I think there's two pieces to that. The quick answer is that if they're difficult and we have a tie to them, meaning we have to maintain a relationship, then that just mucks it up. It makes it complicated, and we can't just sort of walk away. And so we're emotionally already invested in that, and depending on who they are in our life. But from a sort of kind of brain explanation, we all have, and we're kind of programmed in to have a general set of expectations for how communication works. And so when somebody breaks that expectation, right, when somebody comes out with a zinger or a rude comment or doesn't get our cues that we need to go, and they're ignoring the fact that we keep looking at our watch. That's
all familiar.
Yeah, okay. That's upsetting to us. And it triggers what we call sort of this concept of Neanderthink, right? And we've all heard of it as fight or flight or freeze. And there is I won't go into great detail, but there is a biological component to that. And I've talked before about sort of like minnows who zigzag through the water to try to avoid getting caught. That's an ingrained response. Erratic behavior has an ingrained kind of reaction to us. So the person's difficulty, they're sort of breaking our rules, creates this emotional reaction or physiological response, and we can get our thoughtful deliberation on what we're going to say can get bypassed.
Right, and we go to anger or whatever and do something we regret.
Exactly.
Okay, what other kind of things do you have there that might make it hard?
Well, one of the first and most important strategy is to resist the urge to immediately react. Because as I sort of mentioned in the other section, our brain is not necessarily in this thoughtful, reasoned, measured place. And we may end up saying something that we regret or embarrassed by. So don't immediately react, let's say, and maybe it'll be helpful if we think of, if we may kind of come up with a little role scenario here so I can kind of reference back to it.
Oh, okay.
So,
well, you want me to be in this role play?
Sure.
All right. Beth, that's quite a sweater you got there. It's a nice would be stretching it, but it's a sweater.
Perfect. Okay, good. So you just said something that's really snarky and mean, really.
Okay.
And so good. Thanks, Dick. I would say then, first thing we want to do, rather than me to say, okay, so here's my first thought to that. What is your problem? Right. I would just be like coming straight at you, depending on who you were. But you want to try to recognize when somebody says or does something in communication that throws you off, is to say, okay, recognize if you automatically feel defensive. Some people will get very defensive and kind of want to lash out. Same thing as, angry. Angry is just kind of another layer onto the defensiveness. A lot of people tend to, especially if this is a person of authority, will tend to, rather than automatically become angry and want to lash, for some people, and I'm one of them, what triggers is my sense of self-blame, right? My go-to is not to necessarily tell you, to go to wherever, but just sort of, this one's kind of a difficult example for this, but a lot of times women, and men too, but women may tend to sort of self-blame and feel immediately critical of themselves or doubt themselves. So you want to just recognize what that feels like. And if you can, just take a breath or two. And this will depend on where you're at. If it's a friend or spouse or work, I'm going to use these probably more for a work situation because there's a little bit more pressure on you to respond appropriately. I would say, just if possible, ask them if you can take a few minutes to think about what they said. Now, in this one, I'm not. No, this is one I'm not. Yeah. Like, if you came at me and you were a boss and you said, Jennings, you've totally messed up this whole blah, blah, blah.
The aggressive boss, okay.
Right. Then I might want to ask for a minute. Sometimes you can't. And in this situation, it wouldn't make sense.
Okay, you've had your minute. Now what do you do?
Okay. So then a good response, and I find that this works for just almost about anything. You can buy time. Well, number one, you can buy time, but number two, you can actually help kind of diffuse the situation by just asking them to clarify what they meant, or
that's a good one.
Clarify what they said or what they asked for. If they were at. So let me do this one. I'll play this one out, and I would say, "Oh, okay, Dick, I'm not sure what you meant by that." Or, "Can you tell me what you meant by that?" So that's kind of a way to, number one, you're getting them back a little bit on the defensive, or they're not so much on the attack. They've got to own it.
Yeah, that's good.
One of my personal favorites, which is a little bit above and beyond this, is I'll say, "Oh my gosh, I am sure that you did not mean to say that, mean for that to sound that way, but that hurt my feelings."
That's good.
So again, you're softening the message, but you're also letting them know that's not okay. You're putting it out there. And then, maybe I'll generate another example, would be a boss who came and said, "Jennings, you've screwed up every single case review that you've done for this program." Then I would try to find in that statement one thing about the criticism or the, insulting thing or whatever, that I agreed with, that I could recognize. I could say, "Well, I know I did not finish that last one as quickly as it needed to be. You're right." And then you calmly state that you respectfully disagreed with the rest. "Well, I get that. Yeah, you're right. I didn't do X. I don't agree that I did all of them wrong." Something like that. And then the last thing I always want to tell people is you got to remember what your end goal in the exchange is. Because if your end goal is to be right and to prove them, make them feel stupid or regretful or bad for insulting you, that's fine. Then you do that. If your end goal is to keep your job, not to stay on speaking terms with your in-laws, or
or your husband, if your in-laws are killing you and you let them have it, then you got to go home to your husband.
Exactly. So your end goal is important. I think those the neighbor that doesn't stop talking and you can never escape them. that I think the stakes are a little lower, obviously. So you have some more, I think you have to be less kind of soft or mindful about it because you're not as concerned about, keeping your job or what have you.
With that neighbor,
yeah.
If you do find you can't avoid some days just running into him and getting caught.
Yeah.
How do you deal with it?
Well, there are a lot of ways to deal with it, and you'll hear in my examples that I am a very typically conflict avoidant person, even as a professional in this field. So I tend to go the soft way. One of my favorite ways of navigating that is, you're given, let's say with the overtalker, right? You're given the nonverbal cues. You're looking at your phone, watch, whatever, if you have one, and they're just not picking up on it.
Right.
Then I will wait for them to pause. But here's the deal: a lot of people don't.
They just don't pick up. Yeah.
They just don't pick up at all. They don't pause. There's no rhythm, and so I will literally interrupt them and ask them a question.
But then they'll talk again.
No, here's what I'll do. So let's pretend you and I are neighbors.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And we're out on the front driveway. And just be the overtalker neighbor.
Mm-hmm. Oh, what a day I had. You wouldn't believe the day I had. The other day, my nephew came by. Billy, he's really so cute.
Oh, Dick, excuse me. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Do you know what time it is?
Yeah, I do. Let me just finish about Billy. He is an unbelievable kid, Billy.
I know, I bet he is, but I'm sorry, I do need to know, did you...
It's 4:33.
Okay.
So Billy, anyway,
So Dick, I'm really sorry, but 4:30 and I have to go pick up Simon. So I'm going to get going, and I really appreciate...
Oh, good.
And you know what? Maybe you can finish this story later. So
take care. That's very good. Okay.
My point is, but the thing is, with overtalkers, people don't like doing that. They don't like interrupting, and they feel bad when they're interrupting, when they're and so I say, ask yourself, what are you worried about?
What do you do if you're at a dinner party and then there's a storyteller who says, oh, I got to tell you a story. I was in Boston. Well, really not Boston. It's a suburb of Boston. And I was driving this Buick. Is it Buick or an old? And on they go. What do you do?
Well, I happen to be one of those storytellers.
No.
So, yes, I am. And again, that's often a gender communication thing. Well, it depends. Is he talking or is she talking to the whole group, or do you?
Yeah, the whole group. Let's say it's a group of 4. 2 couples are out for dinner.
And it keeps going for a while. I would excuse myself and go to the bathroom.
But isn't that insulting in the middle of their story? They
their
think they're
story is insulting.
But they don't know. They think they're
Who
fascinating.
are you worried about insulting?
The person telling the story.
But they're insulting you by going on and on.
But they don't know that. They think they're fascinating me.
Well, I guess it depends on how well you know them, if you've tried other things. So, for instance, so if this is like a cold, entry, meaning you've not ever communicated with them, you can make some sort of, again, this is a soft thing. It allows them to save face, so you don't humiliate them and whatever, create bad feelings, but you can make some sort of joke about...
you have to go to the bathroom.
Well, no. You can make a joke as silly as, I don't know, I have to hear the story again, but, something about, obviously, now, are you sure you know what kind of car it is? Kind of like joking, nice, but yet pointing out, it's a soft way of pointing out your, Yeah. Now, if this is a good friend, I have people who we have cues, and it's a joke, and they'll say, get to the point, joking. But, I think you can try. You make a joke. If they continue on and on, you can say, in a nice way that helps them save face, something referencing the story so they know you're listening, and then say, let me guess the end. Blah, blah, blah. Or, something where you're engaged with them, you're listening, but you're
moving along.
Yeah.
In closing, Beth, what are some of the resources people could turn to if they want to know more about this subject?
Well, there are 2 excellent books that I would recommend. Both of them are available. I believe both are available either in ebooks or regular books. The first one is a book called Dealing with the Crazy Makers in Your Life. And then the subtitle is Setting Boundaries with Unhealthy People. And the author on that one is David, and the last name is Hawking. That's Hawking. And then there's another book called Out of the Fog, and that's by a author Gary, last name Walters with a W. And that book is actually written for family members and people who are in relationships or sort of in the orbit of somebody who has what we call more of a kind of a serious personality issue, a personality disorder. Mm-hmm. And those are where people who the communication difficulties substantial. So those are the two books that I would recommend. And then there is a wealth of information on the web, particularly I think Psychology Today has some great information. So if you go to psychologytoday.com and type in difficult people, there are several, both identifying and also generating ideas to communicate with them.
Well, Beth Jennings, thanks very much for being with us, and I hope you'll join us on the next edition of Insights.